Welcome into Warchant TV, where we have some fun breaking news alongside Jeff Cameron, the host of the Jeff Cameron Show, weekdays 1 to 3 p.m. right here on Warchant TV, also Seminole Headlines, and Gene Williams, the founder and administrator of Warchant.com. My name is Tom Lang. Welcome to Warchant TV. And again, folks, remember to like and subscribe to our channel because we've got fun stuff. It's the current events, it's the past, and today we are talking about the past because Marvin Jones has been named to the College Football Hall of Fame class of 2022. So who better to reflect on that than our pal Jeff, who was here as a student in those days, right, Jeff? That was your time.
Correct. Yeah.
And then Gene, I mean, you've been here for a long time, and this is one of the best players in Florida State history, one of the best players in college football history. I know you guys are going to get to it. It's overdue. But Jeff, I'll let you take the floor first, as you're typically the driver in these circumstances. Marvin Jones, your favorite football player of all time, is now a College Football Hall of Famer. You've got to be over the moon, sir.
I feel like a little kid. There aren't too many players in history, whether it's Florida State or anywhere else, that I ever get giddy about when I talk about, because, you know, you do this long enough. You've seen a lot of great players come and go, and Lord knows Florida State's had their fair share of all-time great players. But Marvin Jones makes me feel like a little kid again when I talk about him as a football player, because I did see every one of his games, and he's a guy that I would just watch. Gene, I know you were like this. In fact, when Gene and I first became friends, one of the things we bonded over was that Marvin Jones was his favorite player of all time too. And I thought, well, that's awesome, because most people don't say that. A lot of people will say Dion or Charlie Ward or Warwick, but Marvin Jones, to me, really is a quintessential linebacker. It's what it means to be a great linebacker in every facet of the game. He could diagnose. He was physical. He played the pass and the run, and he was ruthless. He was a ruthless competitor. You kind of recognized early on in his career that he was going to be a guy that could change the record books for Florida State. And he did. He went on to go on and win the Lombardi and the Butkus, and he was a consensus All-American. He won everything there was to win. He finished fourth in the Heisman balloting, and it was all warranted. I thought for a time he was the best player in college football, period. I thought that kind of player that an opposing coach would tell you, and Dennis Erickson did. We've seen his quote. He thought Marvin Jones was the best linebacker he'd ever seen play the game of college football. When you heard coaches, opposing coaches, talk about game planning, it always started with, where's Marvin Jones? What will we have to do to account for Marvin Jones?
Yeah, Gene, I didn't realize. So Marvin Jones is your favorite football player too at Florida State?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. It's you know, I've seen so many obviously great defensive players go through Florida State. When you want to talk about Dion, Bulware, this guy to my right, Derek Brooks, it's incredible. But to me, the most fun player I ever got to see was Marvin Jones. Just like Jeff talked, the ferocity, what he brought out on the field every day. I've never seen a college linebacker, any player that I don't think anybody, they talk about yards after contact. I don't know if anybody ever got a yard after contacting Marvin Jones. I mean, every time it was like hitting a brick wall. They would go down every time, and it was just so much fun to watch. And that 92 season was just absolutely epic. That's the year he won the Butkus. He won the Lombardi at the time, the only FSU player to win the two major national awards in the same year. I think he was fourth in the draft and 93 overall. Man, just such a fun guy to watch. And I've been been doing this a long time. I like to interview a lot of people. It might have been 10, 12 years ago, the first time I got to interview, Marvin Jones in like a one-on-one segment. Man, I was getting like the shakes. Like, I've interviewed Bobby Bowden and Dion and Lou Holtz and all these great people. But man, when I got on the phone with Shade Tree, I was like nervous.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what he did for me. He was just so special. And still, I want to get Jeff's opinion on this. Greatest nickname of all time, Florida State player, Shade Tree.
Yeah, without question. Yeah, it's the best.
And that story is just incredible. As a freshman, gets out there running the wind sprints and not realizing that it's not just there and back. You got to keep several times you go back. And he went all out there and back. And just, as you know, out in August, it's hot as balls out there. There's no water back then, and whenever that would have been, like, what is that, 1990 or whenever he was a freshman at Florida State. And, and then he just beeline right to that tree. If you're ever on the old practice fields, they had that big oak tree right there between the two practice fields, man. And he just went over there. I think he might have puked and just sat under that shade tree. And I don't know which coach or somebody called him Shade Tree, and it stuck, man. He's always going to be Shade Tree and always my favorite nickname.
And, it's funny you bring it up, Gene. You're right. We get the chance. One of the great privileges that we have in working in this field is to get to meet and know people and learn a little bit of their story. And, of course, we get the honor of being up close and personal to watch them practice and play. And over time, everybody's the same. Some players are better than others, whatever it might be. But you don't become easily impressed. And yet Marvin Jones is a guy, like you just said, Gene, that when I meet, and I've met him several times, every time I'm nervous that I'm going to screw something up. I want to impress Marvin Jones. He's that guy for me.
And you shake that hand and your hand just disappears in a two.
I tell that story all the time. I just saw Marvin in Miami for the game that we blew when we had the huge lead, Willie's first year. When we were down there, I went to the game, another FSU alumnus. We went to the game, and I saw Marvin walking into the stadium to go to the game. And my friend laughs at me about this. I go, "That's Marvin Jones." and he goes, "Yes, it is." I'm like, "Oh, we've got to go say hello." It's just, I wouldn't do that with anybody else. It's crazy. My old teammate, and I bring it up all the time, I name drop William Floyd all the time. He's my old teammate. One of the things that when he got to Florida State, I remember talking to him about, he would sometimes invite me over to the old Burt Reynolds Hall there, and I'd go so I'd hang out, but I never wanted to stay too long because I wasn't a player with those guys. So I didn't feel right. But I remember asking William specifically, "Can we meet Marvin Jones?" So I did it even back then. I thought he was that impressive. And so the fact that he got to play with him, I was never jealous that William went on to the NFL and won a Super Bowl. I was jealous that he got to play with Marvin Jones.
Did you have the shirt, Jeff? I remember way back they could have player shirts, and then you did. Now with NIL you can. But I remember having that Marvin. What was something about the ACC welcome to Marvin Jones? Because I remember the '92. That was the first year Florida State played in the ACC full time. And man, what an introduction they got to Marvin Jones that year.
Yeah, and there was the shirt also where he's holding his helmet. It's just the image of him, and it says, "You just try to keep up with the Joneses." Yep. And it was crazy. Marvin, he would have been. I just think about what he would have been today in the age of social media. I mean, there were so many highlight hits. That one that we show on a loop is the most famous, but he did that every week. He terrorized people like that every week. And Gene, when you brought up the fact that people didn't move when he hit them, as in they didn't keep moving forward, you're 100% correct. One of the things you got to remember for folks watching at home or who are younger, the fullback is not much of today's game, not part of much of today's game. They don't use them the way they once did. Back then, everybody used a fullback. Well, the reason I bring that up is if you were a linebacker in those days and you had to run fit, you were going to take on an opposing fullback who was going to be 235, 245 pounds, and they were going to be low to the ground, and you were going to have to brace for that, shed that blocker, and he was always the lead blocker, and then you were going to have to stick your head in there and make a tackle. Marvin Jones was the only linebacker at that time. I'm sure there are others, but not in Florida State lore that I ever saw come into the hole for a run fit, take on a fullback with one arm. Just move him and hold him. You would see him just moving a fullback around with one arm, waiting to make the play. It was crazy. I saw opposing fullbacks back down from blocking Marvin Jones. You rarely saw that because fullbacks are tough guys. You would see guys a little sheepish coming into the hole, knowing that they were about to meet Marvin Jones.
And that's what made those 91 and that 92 defenses were so good for Florida State. And anybody knows anything about football, when you're able defensively to take away a major part of the game and running between the tackles, forget it. There is no way you're going to do. You already had a really good defensive line. And then if you happen to somehow get through there and number 55 is waiting for you, it's over. Oh, you get 2 yards. That's about the best case scenario you're going to get trying to run the football between the tackles of Florida State. And it is a shame. We always reminisce about it, Jeff, about he did not get the national championship. Absent a wide right, he gets one. Or, man, if he could have hung out again, the what ifs in Dreamland, there's some universe where Marvin Jones comes back for another year and plays in 93, and you have the greatest linebacker core and maybe one of the greatest defenses of all time in college football.
Yeah, we did get to see him. At least we got to see him with Derek Brooks. Derek was a sophomore that 92 season you're talking about. But you're right, that was a great defense. And Corey Fuller and Clifton Abraham and all those guys were so good. You're right, wide right. They win the national championship, if not for 19-16 at Miami. I was at that game. I'm still pissed about that game, but my man would have won the national championship. He didn't get that, but he did get drafted 4th overall, so you can't blame him, like you said, for leaving. I just wish he would have got that ring. He got everything else there was to do. I mean, Florida State went 11-1 in that year. It was the only loss. They had a lot of wins over ranked teams, including a ranked Virginia team on the road. I remember that game as well. Marvin was a big part of why we won that game. It was a defensive struggle. He just was incredible.
So, guys, when I was, in 92, 93 area, right? Obviously, he just joined the NFL in 93, but I was about 5-6 years old when I was first following Florida State University.
Sure, make us feel old.
I'm sorry. And Marvin Jones was part of those formative years. My sister had just, enrolled at Florida State in the very early 90s. And so I can barely remember pictures of a TV screen in those days, let alone remember seeing him, go sideline to sideline. So for the younger viewers, certainly a lot younger than me, maybe the college kids that are watching this on Warchant TV, remember, guys, like and subscribe to the channel. If you had to liken what watching Marvin Jones at playing linebacker was like at the time, what player would you compare Marvin Jones to for maybe our younger audience so they could get an assessment of who the heck this guy was and why?
Ray Lewis. Would they remember Ray Lewis? I mean, that kind of dominant? I hate to compare him to a Kane, but Ray Lewis
and
is
a criminal, but yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, Ray's one of the greatest linebackers to ever play the game, and I think Marvin was akin to him. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And Jeff, aren't you always, because of where he got drafted and because of the injuries that happened in the NFL, he was never able to be to that level. You think if he gets drafted, a different team doesn't get hurt, is he an NFL Hall of Famer then potentially? I mean, I think he had the talent to do that.
Oh, he was a Hall of Fame talent without question, and he had a really bad hip injury, and it did him in. Now, a lot of people forget this. Marvin was not a bust.
The tackle totals, he's way up there. I mean, he put up some good numbers, but again, playing for the Jets, playing on that crappy, and this isn't back in field turf. This is the thin layer of carpet on top of cement that he had to play on, which I think contributed to his injuries.
Without question. And, he has a stretch, I think, of 4 seasons in the heart of his career at the NFL level, Gene, where he has over 100 tackles every one of those years. He was the NFL Defensive Player of the Week on a couple of occasions in one of those seasons. So he was a guy that people still accounted for. He was still a good player, but yeah, he wasn't the player that we thought he would be because we thought he was on his way to Canton. I mean, we thought that guy would go to the NFL and go to 10 Pro Bowls and be an all-timer and in the Hall of Fame. And if not for injury, I 100% believe he would have done just that.
And the Jets are pretty much like the Jets are nowadays. They sucked back then. So even when he had good seasons and good weeks, nobody really didn't get national attention because they were so bad back then.
No, he would have games, Gene, where he'd have 14 tackles and, the Jets would lose and nobody would really think about it. But I did. I cared. I would always look to see what his numbers were because I loved him. And so I'd go, man, nobody talks about Marvin. He had 13 tackles yesterday. And they weren't tackles downfield. They were tackles at the line of scrimmage. So he was diagnosing and triggering and doing all those things. But you're right. He was just on a god-awful franchise. And his pro career gets largely overlooked. But I'm so glad. I know I'm long-winded in this video because I could go on and on about Marvin. But just congratulations to Marvin Jones if he sees this because this is long overdue. He should have been in the College Football Hall of Fame a long time ago. But he's getting his just due.
Yep. There it is, Marvin, from your number 1 and number 2 fans. I won't say one's number 1.
1A, 1B.
But 1A and 1B. Congratulations to you from the Warchant family. Warchant doesn't exist without players like Marvin Jones at Florida State, everybody. So remember, before you depart today, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Marvin Jones, maybe not in Canton, but he is a Hall of Famer, and he deserves to be. This is Warchant TV. We will talk to you guys next time. For Jeff Cameron, the host of The Jeff Cameron Show, which you can catch Monday, Wednesday through Friday at 1 p.m., and then Seminole Headlines Tuesday at 1 p.m. For Gene Williams, the founder and administrator of Warchant.com, my name is Tom Lang. We will talk to you all on Warchant TV next time.